The unmistakable aroma of fresh coffee hung in the air of the small kitchen in Scottsdale, Arizona, mingling with the almost imperceptible scent of old paper and worry. Joana, 56, her skin marked by decades of desert sun and too many sleepless nights, watched the steam lazily rise from her mug. Her eyes, once bright and filled with contagious optimism, were now fixed on the mail scattered across the worn Formica table. The pile of sealed envelopes, many emblazoned with the imposing logos of banks, credit card companies, and, more recently, collection agencies, seemed to grow exponentially each day, like a living entity devouring her peace. Her heart, a muscle weary from so much struggle, beat with an uncontrolled, frantic pace that had long since replaced the tranquility she once knew. It started with needing to use her credit card for basic expenses, then the difficulty in paying the full balance. Next came the withdrawals from her emergency savings, which quickly dwindled. And finally, the overdue notices, the collection calls, the threat of mortgage foreclosure. She tried to justify every decision, every loan, every sale as an investment in David's future. He needed the best education. I wanted him to have opportunities I didn't, she repeated to herself, like an empty mantra. However, the brutal reality asserted itself. Her son had indeed grown up, prospered, but the money had vanished. And with it, Joanna's security, dignity, and peace. Bankruptcy wasn't just a legal term. It was a feeling of internal collapse, of having lost control over her own life. Joanna's story mirrors that of many, a silent cry echoing the importance of thinking about one's personal future and retirement, even when love for one's children speaks loudest. Joanna's pain was the pain of thousands trapped in a cycle of debt, loneliness, and regret. But deep within her despair, a small flame of hope began to flicker. Joana, unknowingly, was on the verge of a new discovery. It is never too late to start over and take care of yourself. Each beat was a throbbing reminder of the emptiness that surrounded her, not just the nest that once housed her son, but also her bank account, which echoed the same solitude. Joana vividly remembered the sacrifices that seemed to have blurred into one. The endless overtime at her executive assistant job, the canceled vacations year after year, the painful sale of the family's small summer cottage, and finally the mortgage on her home, all to fund the prestigious overseas university she secured for David. Now, he was there, a successful software engineer in New York, building his own digital empire, while she was here, surrounded by silent walls and a financial future more uncertain than ever. Every morning, Joanna's routine began with an attempt to postpone the inevitable. She'd avert her gaze from bank statements, try to ignore calls from unknown numbers, and pretend the pile of bills wasn't growing dangerously. But her body didn't lie. Headaches became chronic. Her appetite vanished, and sleep, when it came, was punctuated by nightmares where numbers multiplied and swallowed her whole. The loneliness, once a mild melancholy from David's absence, transformed into an overwhelming burden. Thousands of American parents, like Joana, live this silent drama. A recent study by the Urban Institute revealed that debt for families with members over 50 has grown significantly in the last decade, often driven by their children's student loans or direct financial aid. Unconditional love, which should be a driving force, paradoxically became a financial trap, swallowing a lifetime's savings and leaving a trail of insecurity. Joana had forgotten herself, her own plans. Her retirement had seemed like an increasingly distant mirage. The image reflected in the mirror was of an exhausted woman, with deep dark circles under her eyes and a lost look, wondering where she had gone wrong. The red alert for Joana didn't come in a single moment, but in a painful progression of small, ignored signs. Insomnia was an old acquaintance of Joanna's, a relentless nightly companion who refused to leave her in peace. In the silent, cold early hours in Scottsdale, she would leaf through old notebooks, filled with her meticulous, now faded handwriting. These were records of a life of sacrifices. Detailed notes on tuition fees, David's expensive flights for his exchange program in Europe, living costs in foreign cities, textbooks, and even his student apartment rent. However, personal finance experts, such as the renowned author and speaker Dave Ramsey, warned that such altruism, when not balanced with a dose of financial pragmatism, can lead to ruin. The biggest causes of personal bankruptcy in the U.S., according to the American Bankruptcy Institute, frequently include a dangerous combination of accumulated credit card debt, unexpected medical expenses, and increasingly prominent the lack of adequate retirement planning or the depletion of savings meant to secure one's future, all to fund their children. Joana fit perfectly into this last group, with painful statistical precision. She had not only used her retirement early, but also taken out high-interest loans and, in a desperate act, mortgaged her home to cover David's extravagant education expenses. Dr. Jenkins showed her disturbing charts from the Federal Reserve, indicating that families over 50 are accumulating debt faster than any other age group. The explanation was clear. Many of these debts are incurred to help adult children, whether with their own overwhelming student debts, with purchasing their first home, or even with daily living expenses. The line between helping and harming oneself was thin, and in Joanna's case, it had been crossed long ago. Each number, once an investment filled with hope for her son's bright future, now felt like a nail being hammered into her own financial coffin. The grave, compassionate voice of financial advisor Dr. Robert Jenkins, whom she had sought out in a desperate act of courage, echoed in her mind. "Joana, you are a classic example of over-indebtedness due to family sacrifice. And believe me, you are not alone. Millions of American parents find themselves in a similar situation," he explained based on concrete data that a recent Fidelity investment study revealed that American parents spend on average a staggering $37.00 to help their adult children, and a significant portion of these parents seriously compromise their own financial security, postponing retirement or depleting their savings for this purpose. The problem, he said, was not a lack of love, which was palpable and unquestionable in Joana, but the blatant absence of financial planning and, crucially, the difficulty in setting healthy boundaries. Many parents, in their selflessness, simply fail to define a clear budget for this assistance, nor do they consider the direct impact on their own retirement plan when making these decisions that first seem so noble. The narrative of the hero mom who sacrifices for her children is deeply ingrained in American culture, glorified in movies, books, and everyday conversations. Joana felt a painful tightening in her chest as she saw the charts, a mixture of relief at not being alone and shame for having allowed herself to reach such a point. She was not an isolated case, but a mere statistic, a cold number in a survey. The social pressure to give the best to one's children, often exacerbated by relentless comparison with other parents, and the burning desire to provide opportunities they themselves lacked, blinds many to the raw financial reality. Dr. Jenkins explained that financial literacy from an early age for both parents and children is absolutely crucial. You need to teach children to be financially responsible, to understand the value of money, and to appreciate their parents' sacrifice. But, more importantly, it's fundamental that parents understand that their own future financial well-being is a non-negotiable pillar for the family's own security, he said, his words sounding like a gentle but firm and undeniable warning. If you don't take care of yourself, Joana, you won't be able to take care of anyone else in the long run. He emphasized that the absence of an emergency fund, excessive reliance on debt to cover basic expenses, and the neglect of long-term investments are common financial traps that invariably lead to bankruptcy. Joana realized, with a mixture of relief and dread, that as painful as it was, she needed to face the truth and, most importantly, start acting. The first step, she concluded, would be to fully admit that the problem wouldn't disappear on its own. It demanded drastic and immediate intervention. With every overdue bill notification that arrived in her mailbox, Joana felt a sharp chill down her spine, a premonition of imminent disaster. The shame of her situation was a heavy burden, a secret she carried alone, but the despair of not knowing how to break free from that vicious cycle of debt was even greater, crushing her. It was then, on a sleepless night, that she remembered Dr. Jenkins' incisive words. The first step to recovery is to face reality, no matter how painful it may be. Inspired by stories of triumph he had shared, like that of Maria, a 60-year-old secretary in Dallas who, facing a desperate financial situation, renegotiated all her credit card debts. Dr. Jenkins suggested she sell some items she no longer used, turning superfluous possessions into capital, and find creative ways to save money daily. She canceled streaming subscriptions she barely used, stopped eating out, and began cooking all her meals at home, rediscovering the pleasure of homemade food. She even started cycling for short distances, saving on transportation and gaining health. It was difficult at first, especially since she was accustomed to a certain comfort and convenience. But with every saving, no matter how small, she saw her progress materialize, tangible and real. The deepest lesson Joana learned was that financial recovery is not magic nor a stroke of luck. It is, instead, a powerful combination of unwavering discipline, meticulous planning, and, crucially, the humility to ask for help when needed. The concrete result of all this effort was remarkable. After just 6 months of rigorous plan implementation, she had already paid off 2 of her smaller debts and was on track to renegotiate the larger ones, seeing interest rates decrease. The light at the end of the tunnel, once so distant and obscured by the dust of bankruptcy, began to shine not like an approaching train, but like a beacon of hope guiding her out of the darkness. And miraculously secured a payment plan that fit her tight budget, Joana decided it was her turn to act. The advisor guided her to create a detailed and ruthless budget, recording every cent that came into her account and, more crucially, every cent that went out. She bought a small hardbound notebook and, with a pen that felt heavy in her hand, began to jot down everything, from the electricity bill, which always seemed to increase, to her daily coffee. At first, the brutal clarity of the situation was frightening, revealing the magnitude of the hole she had dug herself into. But paradoxically, that same clarity was also incredibly liberating, igniting a small flame of hope that perhaps there was a way out. With the detailed budget in hand, a precise map of her financial woes, the next step was the most intimidating: negotiating her debts. Joana felt paralyzed by fear, but Dr. Jenkins encouraged her, insisting that most creditors, especially banks and credit card companies, would rather receive a portion of the debt, even if reduced, than nothing at all. She decided to start with the smallest debts, the ones that seemed more manageable, using the debt snowball method, popularized by finance guru Dave Ramsey. This simple yet powerful strategy involves paying off the smallest debt first, dedicating as much effort as possible to it, while making only minimum payments on the others. Once the first debt is paid off, the amount previously allocated to it is added to the payment of the next smallest debt, creating a snowball effect that accelerates the payoff of the rest. For the larger, more complex debts, like the dreaded personal loan and the mortgage, she sought help from a non-profit credit counseling agency, a recommendation from the advisor. They assisted her in consolidating her debts, simplifying payments, and negotiating lower interest rates with the banks, alleviating the crushing pressure. The process was long and required patience, persistence, and many difficult conversations. But with each agreement reached, Joana felt a lighter weight on her shoulders, a sense that she was finally regaining control. In addition to negotiations, Joana had to drastically cut expenses, a measure she initially found unbearable. Despite the small, yet significant, strides in her financial situation, Jonas still felt lost amidst a tangle of complex financial terms. Expressions like compound interest, inflation, market indices, and low-risk investments sounded like a foreign dialect, incomprehensible to her. Dr. Jenkins, sensing her difficulty and genuine desire to learn, emphasized the paramount importance of continuous financial literacy. He introduced her to the touching story of Carlos, a former rideshare driver in Los Angeles who, after losing all his savings in a fraudulent investment, diligently dedicated himself to learning everything he could about finance. Carlos began by reading books on personal budgeting, watching educational finance videos on online platforms, and attending free online workshops, absorbing every new piece of information like a sponge. She learned about the importance of investment diversification, even with little money, and how patience and consistency trump the pursuit of quick, risky returns. Dr. Jenkins suggested she start with more accessible and secure options, such as index funds or ETFs, which offer diversification at a low cost and mirror market performance, without requiring deep knowledge of individual stocks. The most valuable lesson Joana internalized was that financial literacy is not a luxury reserved for economists or experienced investors, but a vital and accessible necessity for everyone. It is the essential tool that allows us to make informed financial decisions, protect our future, and avoid common mistakes that lead to bankruptcy and despair. Inspired by her own progress, Joana began to talk to David, her son, about what she was learning, encouraging him to start saving and investing early to avoid making the same mistakes she did. The concrete result of this immersion into the world of finance was that Joana not only began to understand the complexity of the financial world, but also to apply this knowledge practically in her daily life, feeling more confident, less vulnerable, and, for the first time in years, truly in control of her financial destiny. He learned not only to differentiate good from bad investments, but, more importantly, to understand the true value of money and the impact of his financial decisions in the long run, realizing that responsibility lay in his own hands. Joana, hearing Carlos's story, realized that knowledge was the master key to avoiding future mistakes and to finally taking full and unrestricted control of her financial life, without relying on third parties or luck. Joana's financial education began with what Dr. Jenkins called the absolute basics, understanding her own cash flow in granular detail. He taught her to categorize every single one of her expenses, from fixed to variable, essential to superfluous, and to identify exactly where her money was going. It seemed simple, but for Joana, it was a revelation. The consultant explained in detail the importance of creating an emergency fund, a safety net to cover unexpected and unforeseen expenses, thus avoiding the need to resort to high-interest loans in times of crisis. Alarming data from BANKRUPTCY show that a large percentage of Americans do not even have $1,000 in their savings accounts for emergencies, a scenario of vulnerability that Joana knew very well and was desperately trying to escape. She began to allocate a small amount to this reserve, even if it was only $20 a week, feeling more secure with each deposit. Dr. Jenkins also instructed her on the insidious dangers of credit card debt and how compound interest can brutally work against you, transforming small debts into unpayable mountains, a vicious cycle that trapped millions of people. He taught her not to view a credit card as an extension of her income, but as a convenience tool that demands rigorous discipline. With each new discovery, each financial term deciphered, Joana felt more empowered and confident. Despite the undeniable progress in her financial restructuring, Joana realized that simply cutting expenses, no matter how disciplined she was, wouldn't be enough to fully recover and rebuild the future that had been compromised. She urgently and creatively needed to increase her income. The idea of extra income always seemed distant and unattainable to her, something reserved for younger people with boundless energy or specific digital skills she lacked. However, Dr. Jenkins, with his vast experience and inspiring examples, introduced her to the story of Ana, a vibrant retiree in Orlando who, to supplement her modest pension, began pet sitting for neighbors during their vacations. In a short time, Ana's pet sitter venture became a small, profitable business, transforming her passion for animals into a stable source of income. And low-risk investments, emphasizing that the primary goal was security and long-term capital growth, not the pursuit of quick, speculative profits. He strongly advised her against venturing into complex or high-risk financial products, especially given her current rebuilding situation. Instead, he guided her to focus on safer, more predictable options, such as U.S. Treasury bonds, considered one of the safest investments in the world, and index funds that mirror the performance of major markets, like the S&P 500. He explained that, even if the returns weren't explosive, consistency, security, and diversification are fundamental for those rebuilding their finances and seeking peace of mind. The main lesson for Joana was that generating extra income and investing intelligently doesn't mean taking unnecessary risks or relying on hot tips, but rather diversifying your income streams and making your money work for you safely, consistently, and patiently. The concrete and motivating result was that Joana began to see a tangible increase in her monthly income, which allowed her not only to pay off her debts more quickly, but also to start her long-dreamed-of emergency fund, and for the first time in her life, make her first strategic investments feeling like a true investor. Joana realized, with a mixture of surprise and enthusiasm, that there were many ways to generate extra income, even at her age and without the need for large initial investments. The key, he explained, was to identify her own skills, interests, and passions and transform them into something valuable that she could offer to the market, no matter how small the niche. Joana began to explore her own skills, those she had underestimated for so long. She had always been an excellent cook, and her apple pies, with their golden crusts and juicy fillings, were famous and praised by friends and family. With Dr. Jenkins' help, who encouraged her to formalize the idea, she decided to offer homemade cakes and pies for small orders in her neighborhood, advertising in local Facebook groups and by word of mouth. Initially, it was just a test of receptivity, but demand exceeded her most optimistic expectations. Furthermore, she learned about sharing economy platforms, a growing phenomenon in the U.S. The consultant suggested she consider renting out a spare room in her house on Airbnb for short periods, a common practice in cities with high tourist traffic. He explained that these complementary passive or active income sources are crucial, not only for those seeking immediate financial stability, but also for accelerating debt repayment and building a financial cushion. Data from the gig economy show that millions of Americans are turning to side hustles and self-employment to supplement their primary income, transforming hobbies into lucrative revenue streams. In the realm of investments, Dr. Jenkins introduced Joana to the concepts of SMART. After months of tireless effort, rigorous discipline, and admirable dedication, Joana's financial situation was finally stabilizing consistently. Debts, once an oppressive burden, were under control and decreasing each month. A small, yet growing, emergency fund began to form, bringing a sense of security she hadn't felt in years. This included not only ensuring a peaceful and comfortable retirement for herself, but also building a small legacy that she could, one day, leave to David, without that goal harming her again, as it had in the past. He helped her create a realistic retirement plan, even if she was starting late compared to many. New expenses arise, income can vary, and it is crucial to adapt. She began to see financial education not as a one-time event, but as a continuous process of learning and improvement. She read articles, listened to podcasts, and participated in online forums to stay updated on best practices. The deepest lesson Joana internalized was that building a sustainable future is not just about numbers on a spreadsheet or the amount of money in a bank account. It is, above all, about a change in mindset and behavior. It's about making conscious decisions daily that prioritize your financial well-being and peace of mind, without neglecting the love and support for those who matter. The concrete result of her transformation was that Joana not only regained her financial health, pulling herself back from the brink of bankruptcy, but also found a new and lasting peace of mind. She knew that, regardless of the future challenges life might bring, she had the tools, the knowledge, and the inner strength to face them. Her story, once a somber portrait of loneliness, excessive sacrifice, and bankruptcy, transformed into a powerful and inspiring example of resilience, overcoming adversity, and new beginnings, proving that it's always possible to rewrite one's own financial destiny. They explored smart investment options, such as private pension plans, which offer significant tax benefits and are specifically designed for long-term growth with regular contributions. Data from the Social Security Administration revealed that many Americans do not save enough for retirement, relying almost exclusively on government benefits, which are often not enough to maintain a minimally comfortable standard of living. Joana learned that unwavering discipline in saving and regular investing is the undeniable foundation of future financial security, and that small amounts saved consistently turn into large sums over time, thanks to the power of compound interest. And her extra income source, homemade pies and cakes, not only brought money but also a new purpose and immense personal satisfaction. However, Dr. Jenkins, with his long-term vision, warned her, "Joana, recovery is an important milestone, but sustainability is vital. The real challenge is to stay out of the hole and build a solid foundation for the future." He introduced her to the story of Thomas, a successful retired engineer in Seattle who, after years of financial prosperity, saw his savings dwindle drastically due to excessive spending, a luxurious lifestyle, and complete financial mismanagement in retirement. Thomas had to painfully reassess his habits, cut expenses, and learn to live within his means to ensure a peaceful and dignified retirement. Joana, upon hearing Thomas's story, realized that the greater challenge was not just getting out of debt, but rather staying out of it for life, cultivating healthy financial habits. To build a truly sustainable financial future and avoid relapses, Dr. Jenkins guided Joana to set clear and measurable long-term financial goals. Beyond long-term planning and investments, Joana also internalized the vital importance of regularly reviewing her budget and making fine adjustments as needed. Life constantly changes, and so do finances. The gentle breeze that entered Joana's home in Scottsdale carried the scent of blooming jacarandas, a scent that once reminded her of David, but now seemed to hold a new promise. That apartment, once a reminder of emptiness and bankruptcy, was now a refuge. In her lap lay a faded photo album, images of young David, of his graduation, of his travels. Each photo was a mix of nostalgia and gratitude. She not only renegotiated her debts and found extra income sources, but also educated herself financially, something she never imagined doing. Most importantly, Joana learned to prioritize herself. She realized that love for one's children does not mean self-annihilation, but rather being an example of balance and responsibility. According to experts in financial psychology, parents who demonstrate financial well-being are more likely to raise financially responsible children. Joana's relationship with David also matured. He, now a conscious adult, understood his mother's sacrifice and, more importantly, the value of his own independence. He began contributing small amounts to household expenses, a gesture that filled Joana with pride. Gratitude for having come this far, for having found the strength to start over. The bills, once an insurmountable mountain, were now just papers neatly organized in a folder. That fear, that feeling of despair that haunted her, had been replaced by a calmness she never thought she would feel again. Joana's journey was a testament to resilience and that it is never too late to start over and take care of yourself. Joana, at 58, was not rich, but she was secure. She had a retirement plan in progress, an emergency fund, and, above all, peace of mind. Her small homemade pie business thrived, and she even began giving volunteer lectures at community centers on financial literacy for parents. Joana's story is a portrait of thousands of parents in the U.S. who, in their immense love, forget themselves. But it is also proof that, with courage, knowledge, and action, it is possible to turn the tide. Joana's final lesson is that taking care of your personal future in retirement is not selfishness, but an act of love and responsibility, both for yourself and for your family. The money vanished for a while, it's true, but Joana found it again, and with it, a new meaning for her life.